The Cursed Ship of the Sea, The Mystery of the Mary Celeste. Setting sail into fate. The year was 1872, and the cold winds of late autumn swept across the bustling port of New York City, carrying the scent of salt water, coal smoke, and dreams of distant horizons. Ships stood tall in the harbor, their masts creaking gently against the pull of the tide, and among them was a sturdy, well-built brigantine named Mary Celeste. She was an American merchant ship, 103 feet in length, with 2 masts and a reputation for strength, though her history carried a streak of bad luck that some sailors whispered about behind closed doors. On November 5, Captain Benjamin Briggs, a respected, devout, and experienced seaman, boarded the vessel along with his wife, Sarah, their bright-eyed 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, and a crew of 7 men. Their destination was Genoa, Italy, and their cargo consisted of over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, a valuable but volatile substance that demanded careful handling. The Mary Celeste was well provisioned with food, water, and supplies for 6 months, a sign that Captain Briggs intended to ensure every man, woman, and child on board was as safe and comfortable as the unpredictable sea would allow. The voyage began without any signs of trouble. Weather reports indicated the Atlantic was restless but not dangerously so. The ship's sails caught the wind, and the crew, a mix of seasoned mariners and newcomers, worked in a rhythm that spoke of confidence and discipline. As the coastline of America faded into the gray horizon, no one on board could have imagined that within a month, the Mary Celeste would be discovered adrift in the middle of the ocean, abandoned, silent, and holding secrets that the world still debates to this very day. The first weeks passed without notable incident. Captain Briggs kept a meticulous logbook, noting their coordinates, wind conditions, and occasional glimpses of other vessels on the horizon. Sarah cared for Sophia, often reading to her in their cramped but cozy cabin, while the crew maintained the ship with routine tasks, adjusting sails, inspecting rigging, and keeping watch for sudden storms. Life at sea was never luxurious, but aboard the Mary Celeste, discipline and good leadership kept spirits relatively high. Then, as the days moved toward the end of November, the Atlantic began to change its mood. The wind became unpredictable, veering sharply from calm to violent squalls. The ship was tossed by heavy swells, forcing the crew to reef the sails more often, and the air grew damp with mist and occasional sheets of rain. Yet nothing in the logs suggested panic or serious damage. The Mary Celeste pressed onward, a lone speck of human ambition on the vast and merciless sea. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, a British brigantine named Dei Gratia, captained by David Morehouse, was also making its way toward Europe. Morehouse was an acquaintance of Briggs, and though the 2 captains had not planned to sail together, fate had a way of steering ships into each other's stories. It was in early December, after weeks of battling wind and wave, that the paths of these 2 vessels would cross, though only one would still have her crew aboard. On December 4, 1872, under a pale, cold sky somewhere between the Azores and Portugal, the lookouts on the Dei Gratia spotted a vessel in the distance. At first, it seemed nothing unusual. Ships often passed in the open Atlantic, but as they drew nearer, a sense of unease spread among the British crew. The ship ahead was moving erratically, her sails partially set but flapping loose, as if neglected. There was no visible crew on deck, no voices calling out, no signs of life. Through his spyglass, Captain Morehouse recognized the ship's lines and rigging. It was the Mary Celeste. A chill ran through him. She should not have been here, in this position, at this time. Something was wrong. Ordering a cautious approach, the Dei Gratia drew alongside the drifting brigantine. The sea slapped against the hulls as a boarding party prepared to cross over. When the men of the Dei Gratia set foot on the Mary Celeste, they found an eerie silence hanging over her decks. The wheel was unmanned, the rigging slightly damaged but not enough to disable the ship, and the sails, though worn by wind, were still functional. The cargo hold was secure, the barrels of alcohol untouched. In the captain's cabin, they found Captain Briggs' logbook, the last entry dated 10 days earlier on November 25. It described calm seas and normal sailing, no mention of disaster or distress. The crew's personal belongings remained in their quarters. Even Sarah Briggs' sewing machine and Sophia's toys were still in place. The ship's provisions were abundant. There was food and water for months. The only things missing were the ship's lifeboat and the people. It was as if they had all stepped off the vessel at once, into the empty Atlantic, and vanished. No struggle, no blood, no damage that would suggest an attack. The Mary Celeste was perfectly seaworthy. Morehouse ordered the ship to be sailed to Gibraltar for salvage, but as the British sailors manned her and felt the creaks of her wooden frame beneath their boots, a superstitious dread began to creep in. Stories of ghost ships were common among seafarers, but to be standing on one, with everything in place except the living souls who should have been there, was a feeling beyond explanation. What could drive an experienced captain, his family, and his crew to abandon a perfectly good ship in the middle of the ocean? Was it sudden fear, a threat unseen, or a creeping madness brought on by the voyage? These questions would follow the Mary Celeste into history, giving birth to countless theories, some grounded in fact, others drifting into the realm of the supernatural, but for now, in December of 1872, the mystery was only just beginning. The ghost ship arrives in Gibraltar. When the Mary Celeste was finally towed into the port of Gibraltar on December 13, 1872, she immediately became the talk of the docks. Sailors, merchants, and townsfolk gathered to catch a glimpse of the so-called ghost ship that had been found drifting aimlessly in the mid-Atlantic. Her weathered hull and tattered sails looked no more damaged than any ship that had crossed thousands of miles of ocean. To the casual observer, she was merely in need of some repairs and a fresh crew. But for those who had heard the whispers, the ship's real cargo was not the 1,701 barrels of alcohol still in her hold. It was the haunting mystery of what had happened to the 10 people who had sailed her out of New York just over a month earlier. Captain Morehouse, commander of the Dei Gratia, reported everything in detail to the British Vice Admiralty Court, which would decide whether his crew deserved salvage rights for bringing the ship in. His account was straightforward. They had found her adrift between the Azores and Portugal, unmanned but otherwise seaworthy, her logbook ending abruptly, her provisions intact, and no signs of violence or natural disaster that could explain the abandonment. Yet as soon as the official investigation began, the case started to twist into something far stranger. The court appointed Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General of Gibraltar, to lead the inquiry. Solly Flood was a man of high intelligence but also of a suspicious and stubborn nature. From the start, he was convinced there was foul play involved. In his mind, no experienced captain would abandon his vessel unless forced to do so by either mutiny, piracy, or some criminal act. He grilled Captain Morehouse and his crew relentlessly, looking for contradictions in their statements, perhaps suspecting that they had attacked the Mary Celeste, killed the crew, and concocted the ghost ship story to claim her as salvage. Morehouse denied this fiercely, pointing out that the Dei Gratia was a smaller ship with fewer men, hardly capable of overpowering another crew without leaving signs of a struggle. The physical evidence on board the Mary Celeste told its own confusing story. There was about 3.5 feet of water in the bilge, not unusual for a vessel of her size and age, but nothing catastrophic. The cargo hold was intact except for 9 barrels of alcohol that were found empty, their wooden staves made from a more porous red oak instead of the white oak used for the others. Some experts suggested that vapors from these barrels could have leaked out, filling the ship with the sharp, intoxicating smell of raw alcohol. If so, a spark could have caused an explosion, but there was no scorching or burning anywhere on board. Still, this alcohol vapor theory planted an idea. Perhaps Captain Briggs had smelled danger, feared an imminent blast, and ordered everyone into the lifeboat until the fumes dispersed. But then, why had they never returned? The lifeboat was gone, and the wind and waves could have easily carried it away, leaving them lost at sea. It was plausible, yet it felt incomplete. Meanwhile, Gossip swirled in Gibraltar's taverns and markets. Some said sea monsters had taken the crew. Others claimed a sudden waterspout, a tornado of the sea, had plucked them away. The more superstitious whispered that the ship was cursed, pointing to her troubled past. She had once run aground and undergone several changes of ownership before ending up in Captain Briggs' hands. There were even tales of ghostly lights seen around her masts as she drifted, an omen that the dead still lingered aboard. Solly Flood, still chasing a criminal angle, sent divers to inspect her hull for signs of collision or attack, but they found nothing: no cannon holes, no ram damage, no scrapings from rocks. Her sails had been partially furled, her ropes and rigging were weather-worn but functional, and her compass and navigational instruments were still in place. The ship's stove was dismantled, perhaps in the middle of cleaning, and the captain's cabin had been left in a strangely orderly state, as though the family might walk back in at any moment. The last logbook entry, 8 miles from Santa Maria, island in sight, gave no clue of trouble. The ship's clock was stopped, and the sextant and chronometer were missing, along with the ship's papers, suggesting they were taken in the lifeboat. But there was no storm recorded that day in the region, and other ships had passed through without incident. As the weeks passed, Solly Flood's suspicions toward Morehouse faded, but his determination to solve the riddle did not. The salvage hearing concluded in March 1873, awarding the Dei Gratia crew only a fraction of the potential value of the Mary Celeste, an unusual decision, possibly influenced by the lingering doubts around the case. The ship herself was repaired and refitted, eventually put back into service under new captains, though her reputation as a jinxed vessel never left her. Yet the central question, why had Captain Briggs and his entire company abandoned her in the middle of a perfectly good voyage, remained as unanswered as ever. Over the years, new theories emerged and old ones resurfaced. Some claimed pirates had attacked and murdered the crew, but the undisturbed cargo made that unlikely. Others suggested mutiny, but there was no sign of violence or theft. The alcohol vapor theory persisted, but the lack of fire damage weakened it. A few believed that a sudden waterspout or freak wave had swept the deck, carrying people overboard and prompting the rest to flee in panic. Still others thought the ship might have struck a hidden reef, causing a temporary panic over her seaworthiness. And then there were the supernatural explanations, whispers of ghosts, sea serpents, and even alien abduction in more fanciful retellings. Whatever the truth, the case of the Mary Celeste became one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time. Her story spread in newspapers across America and Europe, inspiring novels, plays, and endless speculation. But for all the ink spilled and theories proposed, the fate of those 10 souls remained lost in the cold, restless waters of the Atlantic, leaving the Mary Celeste not just as a ship without a crew, but as a riddle without an answer, a riddle that continues to haunt the minds of those who dare to search for the truth. The final hours at sea. To imagine what happened aboard the Mary Celeste in her final hours with a living crew, we must piece together the fragments of evidence like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. Captain Benjamin Briggs was known as a cautious, God-fearing man with nearly 2 decades of experience at sea. He would not abandon his ship lightly, especially with his wife, Sarah, and 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, on board. The decision to leave the Mary Celeste must have been sudden, urgent, and in his mind, unavoidable. The last logbook entry on November 25, 1872, placed the ship just 6 miles from the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. The weather that day, according to nearby ships, was calm but with low clouds. The sea swelled gently, not dangerously. Yet sometime in the hours after that log entry, something must have convinced Briggs that staying aboard was a greater risk than lowering the lifeboat. One theory suggests that when the 9 alcohol barrels leaked their vapors into the hold, the smell may have been alarming. Alcohol fumes are not only intoxicating but highly flammable, and in an enclosed space, they can ignite without warning if exposed to a spark from a lantern or stove. Perhaps Briggs opened the cargo hatch, smelled the fumes, and feared an explosion. Even if he didn't see flames, he might have believed that one could erupt at any moment. If he had recently dismantled the stove for cleaning, as the evidence suggested, perhaps he intended to prevent a fire, but in the process realized how volatile the air had become. A temporary evacuation in the lifeboat, tied by a long rope to the ship, could have seemed like a sensible precaution until the fumes dissipated. This could explain why they took navigational tools and important papers, not expecting to be gone forever, but simply to be prepared if the situation worsened. But what if something went wrong with the rope or the weather? If the wind picked up suddenly, the lifeboat could have been pulled away, the line snapping under strain. In the vast Atlantic, even a few hundred yards away from the Mary Celeste, a small boat could be quickly lost in the swells. With the ship sailing on under partial sail, the distance would grow rapidly, and the crew would have no way to catch her. They would drift helplessly, the outline of their ship shrinking until it vanished into the horizon, leaving the Mary Celeste to sail alone. Other theories are darker. Some suggest that Briggs may have misread the condition of the ship entirely. The 3.5 feet of water in the bilge might have seemed more dangerous than it was. Without modern pumps, water inside the ship could cause serious concern. If the pumps were clogged, and they were found dismantled, Briggs might have believed that the ship was slowly sinking. Combine that with poor visibility and the thought of land nearby, and he might have decided to row to Santa Maria rather than risk going down far from shore. In this scenario, the decision was still logical to him at the time, but tragically wrong. If they missed the island or the weather shifted, they would have no chance of survival. Yet there are details that resist every theory. Why were the captain's belongings and his wife's jewelry left behind? If they truly feared never returning, surely they would have taken these valuables. Why were the sails not properly secured, as any good captain would do before abandoning ship? And why, in the calm conditions reported by other vessels, did they not simply return to the Mary Celeste if they realized their mistake? Some believe the answer lies not in a single event but in a chain reaction, a series of small problems that together created a crisis. A faulty chronometer could have thrown off the position, making them think they were closer to the Azores than they were. The leaking alcohol could have created the smell of danger without visible flames. A partially flooded bilge and broken pumps could have added to the fear. And perhaps an unexpected squall or sudden gust of wind made the lifeboat's tether snap. In this tangled web of possibilities, even the most careful captain could make a fatal decision. The haunting part is how quickly the situation would have unfolded, a normal day turning into disaster in a matter of minutes, leaving no time for second thoughts. Decades later, mariners and historians would study the Mary Celeste case, each bringing their own interpretations. Some point to human psychology, the way fear can push people toward decisions that seem irrational in hindsight but feel unavoidable in the moment. Others emphasize the unpredictability of the sea. Out there, a single miscalculation can mean the difference between safety and death. Whatever happened, the final hours of the Mary Celeste's crew were likely filled with confusion, urgency, and a fragile hope that they would see their ship again. But the ocean is a vast and indifferent keeper of secrets, and once they slipped beyond sight of her tall masts, their fate was sealed. The Atlantic swallowed their story whole, leaving the ship itself as the only witness, drifting silently, her wheel unmanned, her decks empty, her destination now a mystery. And so, the legend grew. When sailors spoke of her, they did so with a mix of awe and unease, for the Mary Celeste was more than a ship without a crew, she was a floating reminder that the sea holds mysteries that no court, no investigation, and no human mind can fully unravel. The ship that wouldn't die. When the Mary Celeste was finally towed into Gibraltar in December 1872, the story of her empty decks spread quickly through the maritime world like wildfire. Newspapers across Europe and America published lurid headlines, each adding a little more drama to the facts. Some claimed that blood was found on her rails, others spoke of a bloody sword hidden in the captain's cabin. In truth, many of these details were false, born from the human tendency to fill in the blanks with something thrilling. The truth, that she was simply abandoned without clear cause, was in many ways even more disturbing. The salvage hearings in Gibraltar were tense, with the British Vice Admiralty Court trying to determine whether a crime had been committed. Suspicion briefly fell on Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia, the man who had found her. The theory was that he and his crew might have attacked the Mary Celeste to claim her valuable cargo and earn the salvage reward. But this idea made little sense. The Mary Celeste was found in a seaworthy condition, still carrying almost all her alcohol barrels, and Morehouse was a respected captain who had been friends with Benjamin Briggs. Eventually, the court cleared him of wrongdoing, though they awarded a smaller salvage payment than usual, perhaps because the mystery felt too strange to reward fully. The Mary Celeste was repaired, restocked, and returned to service, but sailors whispered that she was cursed. Crews were reluctant to work on her, claiming she carried the ghosts of her lost passengers and crew. Her new owners had trouble finding men willing to sail her, and those who did often reported bad luck, storms, equipment failures, and near collisions that seemed to follow her wherever she went. In 1879, the ship's captain, Edgar Tuthill, fell ill and died at sea, feeding the superstition that anyone in command of the Mary Celeste would meet a grim fate. For years she changed owners again and again, each seeming to rid themselves of her as quickly as possible. By the late 1880s, her reputation had grown so dark that some believed she would never safely complete a voyage again. In 1884, she came under the command of Captain Gilman C. Parker, a man in deep financial trouble. Seeing the Mary Celeste as a way out of his debts, he plotted to intentionally wreck her and collect the insurance. Parker loaded her with a worthless cargo of cheap goods, insured them for a high value, and sailed toward the West Indies. Near the coast of Haiti, he deliberately ran her aground on a reef, hoping to claim the ship was lost in an accident. But fate, or perhaps the ship's curse, had other plans. The scheme was uncovered almost immediately, and Parker was charged with fraud. Although he avoided a long prison sentence, his reputation was ruined, and he died only 3 months later, penniless and disgraced. The Mary Celeste, battered by the reef, was left to rot where she lay. Slowly, the waves and salt wore her down until the once proud brigantine became little more than driftwood, scattered along the Haitian shore. Yet her legend refused to sink with her timbers. Writers, poets, and storytellers seized on her mystery, weaving tales of mutiny, ghostly possession, sea monsters, and alien abduction. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, years before creating Sherlock Holmes, even wrote a fictionalized account of her story, calling her the Mary Celeste, and adding bloody footprints, an abandoned cat, and a crew that vanished into thin air. Though his tale was meant as fiction, many readers took it as fact, and for decades afterward the line between truth and invention blurred. In taverns along the docks of Boston, London, and Lisbon, old sailors swore they had seen her drifting in the fog long after her wreck, her masts looming like the bones of a phantom. Some claimed she was a ghost ship, doomed to sail forever in the afterlife, crewed by the souls who had left her in life. Others believed the ocean itself had taken her people as payment for some old, forgotten sin. The power of the Mary Celeste legend lies not just in the unanswered question of what happened in November 1872, but in what came after. Her physical end, a broken hulk on a Haitian reef, could not kill the sense that she still sailed in another form, in the minds of all who hear her name. Even today, more than a century later, her mystery remains unsolved. The ocean has kept its secret well, as it always does. But when we speak of the Mary Celeste, we are not only speaking of one ship's strange fate. We are speaking of the vast unknown, the thin line between safety and disaster, and the way the human imagination fills that unknown with both wonder and fear. For as long as ships sail the seas, there will be whispers of the Mary Celeste, the ship that would not die, the ship that sailed without her people, the ship whose story belongs as much to the realm of legend as it does to history. When the sea keeps its secrets. The mystery of the Mary Celeste has been retold for more than 150 years, and every retelling adds something new, like a layer of mist over an already shadowy horizon. Historians have gone back through the ship's logs, studied weather records from November 1872, and examined the personal histories of everyone on board. Some believe that an unexpected natural event may hold the answer. Perhaps a sudden waterspout struck the vessel, soaking everything and frightening Captain Briggs into thinking the ship was taking on dangerous amounts of water. In such a panic, the lifeboat might have seemed like the safer choice, even though it meant abandoning the larger, sturdier ship. If this happened, and the lifeboat's tow rope broke or was cut, the crew would have been left adrift in the vast Atlantic, slowly disappearing from sight as the Mary Celeste sailed on without them. Others argue for a more sinister explanation: a mutiny driven by fear, madness, or greed. Yet no signs of struggle or theft were found, and Captain Briggs was known for his steady leadership and fair treatment of crew. Pirates were also suggested, but the cargo was untouched, and no pirate ships were reported in the area. Then there is the theory of the alcohol itself. The barrels carried by the Mary Celeste contained industrial-strength spirits, some of which were found empty. If fumes leaked into the ship's lower decks, it could have caused the crew to believe an explosion was imminent. This might explain why they left the ship quickly without taking much, expecting to return once the danger passed. But the sea is not forgiving, and once they were gone, fate may have sealed their end. The trouble with each theory is that it solves one piece of the puzzle while creating new gaps in the picture. No one can answer the most haunting question: if the Mary Celeste was in good condition when found, why did they not simply wait out the danger on board? In the decades after her wreck, more and more ships were said to have been found abandoned under strange circumstances. Sailors began to call these ghost ships, and the Mary Celeste became the standard against which all such mysteries were measured. Even modern maritime technology, satellites, radar, GPS, has not completely erased the possibility of a ship vanishing in strange ways. Each time wonders, reporters and historians invoke the name Mary Celeste, as though her spirit still haunts the sea lanes. What makes her legend so powerful is that there is no final answer. People are drawn to mysteries because they invite us to imagine possibilities, some rational, some wild, all compelling. For some, the Mary Celeste is a cautionary tale about the sea's unpredictability, a reminder that nature can change a situation in seconds. For others, she is a ghost story, proof that there are forces at work beyond our understanding. And for storytellers like you and me, she is both a real event anchored in history that will forever drift into the realm of legend. Even the most grounded explanation cannot strip away the eerie image of that ship, her sails partly set, her decks silent, her wheel unmanned, floating in the empty Atlantic like a phantom. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the creak of her timbers, the slap of waves against her hull, and the whisper of wind through her rigging. You can almost see the shadow of her lost crew moving about, doing their work as though nothing had happened, trapped in some eternal loop between life and disappearance. We will never know if they were taken by storm, by accident, or by something stranger. The ocean does not share its secrets willingly, but perhaps that is why we are still talking about the Mary Celeste all these years later. She is more than a shipwreck, she is a mirror for our own need to seek answers, to make sense of the unknown, even when we cannot. And maybe, somewhere out there on a foggy horizon, her ghost still drifts, sails full, deck empty, waiting for the day someone finally solves her riddle. Until then, she remains the eternal queen of maritime mysteries, the legend that the sea will never let go.